Thank you for your time. My name is Beitullah. I appreciate you being here. Please keep in mind what we are doing here on Bet On It, Shooting from the Hip. We explore human ideas, philosophies, noteworthy information. This exploration is us thinking aloud, a thought exercise, jumping into ideas and examining them and re-examining them. You will find we are prone to using adult language and expressing opinions. In keeping with that, you shouldn't believe anything we say. We are not experts of any kind. We are just having fun with these ideas, philosophies, and information, in the hopes that you will find it fun and interesting and entertaining. We encourage you to invest time in searching out these subjects and coming to your own conclusions. Now on with the shit show. Slim, how you doing, buddy?
Good. I'm ready for the podcast. How are you?
Excellent. I'm feeling mighty good these days, and looking forward to the return of spring, and that means summer-like weather is just literally around the corner. So
I hope so. Today I almost told the worker at Tim's, like, hey, are you ready for winter again?
well, if you didn't know any better, you'd swear you're in the middle of fall. So having said that, today's episode is a conversation that we very often have on this episode, but we're going to formally today be discussing subjectivity and objectivity and why do they matter. And this is part 2. The very first Shooting from the Hip video was titled Subjectivity and Objectivity and Why Do They Matter. And so today we'll take a really interesting dive into these ideas. So I know we've discussed this stuff at length, but I wanted to start the entire conversation around the idea that human beings are very malleable. So it speaks to the argument that I make that one of the many natures of being human is adaptability. So that means that we can, that dependent on the stimuli, that we will perfectly adapt to meet the demands of whatever stimuli there is, right? So, and having said that, that means that it's a double-edged sword, and in the sense that it can actually, you can condition humans to be the highest expression of who and what they are, and that's an individual choice, but it can also be done externally. And conversely, you can also be conditioned to be, addicted, to exhibit addiction and the behaviors that come with addiction. So having said all of that, so we'll start with the things that do impact subjectivity and objectivity of the individuals, and how those things are formed. So I think first is required is probably redefining or defining what subjectivity and objectivity are before we move forward. So you got to keep all this in mind. I know it's a ton of information, but hopefully I will explain it in such a way that it'll make perfect sense, right? And then it'll leave you questioning everything, which is a good thing, right? So having said that, subjectivity in the philosophical context is a lack of objective reality, right? Now you're completely, you perceive, perception being a really important part of this, you perceive everything under subjectivity. And then to define subjectivity, it is biases, preferences, opinions, prejudices. All those things are subjective, in that you, the individual, are the reference point in the way that you interpret what you experience through your 5 senses within reality or any given environment you find yourself in, right?
Yeah.
Make sense so far?
Yes.
Okay. So it's kind of ambiguous, the definitions for subjectivity, but the definition I've provided is the one that I think most honestly reflects what subjectivity is, right? So, and subjectivity, the word itself can be used in different ways. So the subject of conversation is subjectivity and objectivity, right? So the subject is the focal point, right? And so then subjectivity, as an individual experience, it's you as the central reference point in which you interpret everything that's going on around you in terms of how, not just how it affects you, but how you relate to all of that stuff, right? So, and remember, subjectivity makes you prone to the most selfish of behaviors, self-interested behaviors, right? That's also something that occurs within somebody who lives entirely through their subjectivity, or experiences reality primarily through their subjectivity, right? Okay, so now having said that, I think that it might be now good to sort of jump into objectivity, and then I'll start to explain how, as individuals, how subjectivity is becomes a focal point of our conditioning. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll just address objectivity. So objectivity is the concept of a truth independent from individual subjectivity, right? So it's the suspension of your self-interest is probably the most simplest way to express it. So you don't look at any given situation in terms of how it's going to affect you, or if there's any meaning assigned to it, or for you as a result of whatever it is you're experiencing subjectively. That you suspend all that, and then what you're kind of left then with considering what the objective truths are, right? And you meet them without bias, so it's an impartial observation. In science, you'll often hear them talk about scientific objectivity, where they don't have a dog in the fight. They're just simply following, doing the work and seeing where the work leads, right? And then they make their conclusions after the experimental, which is the work, produces effects, and then they make observations on the effects, and then try to draw conclusions from those very observations, right? So remember, your biases are caused by your perceptions, your emotions, your imagination, your preferences and opinions and prejudices. All those things are constantly at work within an individual. Most of us don't even recognize them, and most of us treat our opinions as though they're somehow important, at least important to you, and then worth defending against somebody else's opinion, when it's really just an expression of your imagination, the idea that you have about any given thing. Now, having said that, there's a clear definition that we understand between subjectivity and objectivity, right? Have I lost you at all? Have I been confusing you?
No, I was just thinking of examples. Like a subjective person would be in a zoo, see a chimp that's smiling at it, and think, oh, it's smiling. Like, I know that means happy, but for that animal, it does not mean happy. You don't want to see a smiling chimp at you, like looking at you. It's like an aggressive behavior or distinction.
Okay, so again, out of ignorance or out of their subjectivity, they come to a very wrong conclusion.
Right, which is understandable, but objectively speaking, you could recognize like the behaviors of that animal would be different than a human because it has like different biological imperatives. And like you think of it in the animal.
Well, actually, the biological imperatives that drive us and any living organism are largely the same, right? Reproduce, seek food, find community, or their culture, or whatever, however they're programmed. Because in terms of like animals like snakes and alligators, or gators and crocodiles, they don't have family units per se, right? But for most organisms, they operate within a family unit or have some kind of tribe or whatever.
Okay.
So those are biological imperatives, right?
So
we all share those.
This would be more like conditioning that comes from the animal, based on. I'm not actually.
No,
That's
the monkey's demonstrating its biological imperative. It sees you as a threat.
Right.
So it's acting. So now it's establishing that you are a threat, even though you don't understand that its action is signaling to you that you're a threat.
Yeah. Okay. I misused the word biological imperative.
That's okay. It's all good.
But the display of certain emotional patterns,
or the act of smiling, right? That
Yeah.
it's an aggressive. They're taking on an aggressive posture.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's very different. Whereas objectively speaking, you recognize like, oh, different animals have.
It's reacting to me, but you can't be. Objectively speaking, if I hope you don't mind me jumping in.
No, it's okay.
That I'm going to use the example that you cited. So if this is a chimp is smiling at you, that objectively speaking, you recognize that now it's physically demonstrating something, but you can't be certain what it is.
Right.
Right. On the although initially you might see it as something kind of like I don't want to say friendly, but non-threatening. It's exactly what it is, right? But if you're not unaware of that, you're oblivious to those patterns of behavior that you can't recognize what it actually signifies, then objectively speaking, you can only know that it's reacting to you. It stops right there, because from there, you would start taking leaps, subjective leaps. Oh, it must like me, it's smiling. Or no, this is the precursor to it trying to bite you. All right, so I again, objectivity just warns you then that here's the limit of the observation. So you can't make any assumptions. You stop right there. So the expression I used to hear as a kid all the time, especially in the late 70s, was expect the unexpected, or another way of saying expect nothing. So if you're expecting the unexpected or expecting nothing, that's being objective. You're just being cognizant of what's going on. So you have this observation, and then from the observation, you have to make a decision on whether or not or what might actually be going on, and whether or not that it might be threatening or unthreatening, right? And you can't know that in that particular moment. So now it requires what? Further observation. You require more objective information to make a determination. So you don't. Well-conditioned subjective humans will go right to a subjective interpretation or perception of what they're experiencing, right? So we move in and out of subjectivity and objectivity. So if I made it sound like that you're trapped entirely in one or the other, that's not true. You move in and out of both of them. But if you're a master of self, then you know when to apply subjectivity, and you know how much value to assign it, right? And we'll discuss the value of subjective views versus objective views, right? Okay, so having said that, so what also goes hand in hand with subjectivity and objectivity, we're going to discuss classical conditioning, which is learning through association, right? And if any of you are wondering what the hell I'm talking about, remember we did an episode on Pavlov's dog, and it was Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. And he was a Russian experimental neurologist, psychologist, and physiologist known for discovering the classical conditioning through his experiments with dogs, right? So now, having said all of that, and we know as human beings that we're completely malleable and adaptable to stressors, any kind of stressors that are applied to us. Now I'm going to try and link all this stuff together. So here we go.
Yeah.
So if society, culture, any kind of formal structures, education, entertainment, that exist within the context of society, they're all exerting influence. They're stimuli that exerts influence on the individual. So we can even include with entertainment, news, and education and culture, technology, especially personal technology, phones. So all these things now are contributing or impacting each individual that uses them. So it doesn't matter if you don't have them all. All of them are influencing you, and this is how they're influencing you. They're helping you to form your opinions, your biases, your perceptions, emotions, preferences, and opinions. All that stuff is being formed by all that stimuli, and then it includes familial interactions and personal relationships outside of your family, right? So all these things are contributing to the development of who you are. Now your brain's wired in such a way, right? And this is where classical conditioning or responded conditioning comes into the picture. That the default mode network of your brain wants you to be distracted, right? So it functions so that you're like hyper vigilant because it was a great survival tool when we were hunter and gatherers, and your chief concern was yourself. Now we have all these external factors that are impacting the individual and fuel the default mode network, right? So all these things are impacting you. So what they're training you to do is to be better at subjectivity and to favor your subjectivity, right? And not only to favor it, now your ego steps into it because, again, they're another component which wants you to be important. And you wants everything about you to be meaningful. So now the random thought generator or the default mode network starts spitting out random thoughts based on all that stimuli, and it wants you to favor you. So then what does it produce in terms of behavior? It'll be always selfish and self-interested behaviors first. Now, we couldn't survive if we were purely selfish and self-interested. We appreciate the value of connection, but now because we're trapped in that subjectivity and the people that we're interacting with are trapped in theirs, it also has a negative impact in the way that the relationships we have with each other. So all of this stuff is training you, another way of saying conditioning, which is another way of saying brainwashing, you to be more self-interested, more subjective, more self-serving, right? And then remember, the society fosters in us as individuals a very strong sense of competition and consumption because your value is assigned by how much you can consume and how well you compete. So think what it does then to now all this is going on, and I think for those who can't compete, how much it disempowers them. All right, so there you go. So here's all the negative impacts. Doubt me? Remember, mental health issues have been on a steady incline and have spiked in the last 20 years, and especially in the last 3 or 4. I think you can thank COVID for that. So it was always on an incline, but COVID just managed to amplify it. And we very inadequately address the fact that this is going on within the course of not just one person, but a majority of people are being affected by this. So I'm going to stop there for a moment. So does any of that make any sense so far? And is there any comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, it's a lot to digest, but at the same time, it all seems very easy to take that information you gave and put it in the context of my own life. Like, as a hypothetical, a subjective person watching a drama, let's say the person that's watching is a lady, and there's a lady in the movie who likes this guy who the viewer thinks is handsome. So she's watching her, ask him out on a date, he says no to her, the character, and then the character, since they're so relatable to the viewer, they'll have an emotional reaction as if it's real, but it's not real. They're looking at entertainment. Same with like anybody who's looking at a
Right. So the nervous system can't make the distinction.
yeah, which is a huge thing. Because like if you're, I'm not saying like video games make you violent, but if you play video games and you're constantly aggressive because you're losing,
It predisposes you to it.
exactly.
Like so, you're right. It doesn't. It only draws out what is it's already there. Right. So that's the critical thing to take from this. So.
So I have one more
Oh
thing.
yeah, sure, please.
So a big issue I think is because we're looking at entertainment, or we're like, yeah, no, nearly everything that I can think of that works well for this example is strictly entertainment. If you're looking at that,
But even things like political ideologies.
yeah, all those isms.
Right. There are philosophies that were the focus of the philosophy somehow to be more self-interested, which is like, to me, counterintuitive. But please go.
I think there's in any structure like that where it tries to take the whole and reduce it to a body of information you can digest, like any religion, any TV show that tries to give you like a model of this is what life is like, it never turns out correct. Like you're even if you're giving yourself a lot of good data points to work off of, like if you think of your
Right. So the discussions of what's morally appropriate. But that requires you now to identify and define them, which is what you're doing. So then the question is, in identifying and defining them, are you exhibiting them as behaviors? And the answer to the question is no, because the behaviors are being impacted by all these things that you experience through the structure of society, your culture. They all influence you. And then the most self-interested parts of your nervous system favor that stuff. So then why that's important is it translates into your behavior.
Right, and these entertainments, they're not like a one-to-one representation of reality. It's a drama. It's
Right.
A horror.
It's meant to be to elicit an emotional response or to get you to feel something, right? So again, emotions negatively impacting you. So why does this all matter? Why does that ultimately make any difference? Well, here's why. All right, so it has everything to do with mental health. And mental health is a result of all those stimuli and impactors that focus you to be more self-interested. And in the course of being more self-interested, that means you're going to respond to everything out of emotion. And the chief emotion that drives it all will be fear. And it's fear of pleasure and fear of pain. Fear that you're not going to get enough pleasure, fear of the pain of not getting what you want, fear. And do you notice how we tend to gravitate and are drawn like moths to a light to fear as human beings? When we do that, and then our nervous system and the default mode network takes that stimuli and amplifies it further. So now you're going to go into this horrific cocktail of emotions, which started with fear, will lead to resentment and anger, which ultimately will lead to hate, right? And your behaviors are an extension of all that stuff. So then you'll be conflicted because now all the moral cues that you've been taught, like you don't lash out violently, you can't do this, and now you're stifling these intense emotions. So then it can only lead to one place: suffering.
I was gonna say the dark side.
Well, suffering. It leads to suffering, and suffering. Then in that suffering, you'll experience self-loathing, which will feed back into the default mode network and further amplifying those negative feelings. And then those will translate into negative behaviors, right? So for people who are curious about why they're suffering as much as they do, it's because no one's adequately explained what subjectivity is, and that you're primarily trapped in your own subjectivity. And that's why you suffer. So you want to alleviate suffering, then you have to, as a counterbalance, do something to foster greater objectivity.
Right, because I 100% agree, and I love how you said it too. I always have to pause. I know it's like you're a lot more fluent when it comes to English, but
For me, largely because remember, this is a subject I've agonized over for better part of 20 years, right? Because I was trying to understand why I suffer, why I experience things like self-loathing, why I suddenly felt so disempowered and incapable of moving forward, and yet demonstrate all this high physical aptitude and ability. So it made it all the more confusing. So to try and to cultivate enough of an understanding so that now I could act in such a way that now I could undo all those negative effects, right? And it's a long, slow process.
what I was gonna say before, I'll just ask you, like, do you feel like the reflexive emotional states you get in are solely based around negativity and they'll pass from one to another? And there's only like little troughs where you get into positive behaviors.
Okay, so to answer the question, once you're trapped in emotional cycles, it feeds into the default mode network of your nervous system. So it just sets up that cycle, right? And all it'll produce is greater and greater degrees of those emotions. And remember, the random thought generator, you're the focus of it, and the majority of the thoughts you have are negative. So it fuels all that emotional content. And now you're going to go out and socialize with other people, and they're going to express their opinions. And now part of you expressing yours, or that social interaction, is you can indirectly influence their emotional state through your negative emotional state. And then because they're not what they're wired like you're wired, especially if you trigger them, all it'll produce in them is now another cycle, a negative cycle. And hence the reason why we seek distraction. Because if you're drunk, high, or engaged in sex, or eating comfort foods, it's a momentary relief from that. But it's only that. It's only momentary. That's why you get trapped now into that behavior. Now you'll have anxiety and stress as a result of those behaviors, because you're using them as coping mechanisms, very unhealthy coping mechanisms for all the stuff that you're struggling with that has everything to do with your emotions, your psychology, and the way your nervous system works, and then all these influential external factors which happen to do with everything within the context of society: news, entertainment, culture, all of it.
Yeah, it's crazy because you think about like just how amazing the experience of like being a person is. It's like now you're addicted to potato chips. Are you kidding me?
Well,
it's silly.
Okay, so then,
but it's understandable.
Okay, right. That it's perfectly understandable. You can see, in the most logical and reasonable way, you can see the traps in the patterns of behavior, and they create these cycles that further fuel the worst of what we are.
Oh, that's one thing I wanted to bring up. It's not just that you're stuck in negativity; it's all the negativity. So you're going through like, whatever the opposite of gratitude, like great resentment and displeasure.
Right.
Your account, but not your account, but the hand you're dealt. So you're dipping in and out of anger, depression, resentment, regret. All these things reflexively push you back more into the negative zone.
Right.
But it's not like just trying to be happy makes you happy. It's being objective, doing good things that are objectively good for you, and then you just fucking hope it works.
Okay, all right. So instead of hoping that it works, the answer then to subjectivity, because the reason why you experience it in the way that you do is because you've assigned meaning and purposefulness to your subjective experience. And so the chief counterbalance is first to recognize that your subjectivity, as a result of everything that you're exposed to, is of zero value. shouldn't treat it as it's valuable in the sense that, here's the best part of it, that it's valuable in the sense that it becomes a unique reflection of you as an individual, and then you can very artfully play with it so that now you tweak things like your all those biases, your perceptions, your emotions, imagination, preferences, opinions, prejudices, all that stuff you treat with zero value. It's just you having fun with being you, right? But that's why there's so much anxiety and pathology and psychology that's negative with the individual, because they treat all these things that are just constructs of your mind. Even identity, you can lump that in there too. That all these things are inherently not really valuable. They're thought constructs. You can change them at will. But most of us get trapped into patterns of behavior, right? Which are fostered by the stimuli within the society that we live in. And now it's a global society. So people are being affected in the same way here as they are on the other side of the planet. Especially if you live in heavy urban centers where life is essentially the same.
That's a weird thing, because in these urban centers, we consider this a norm. Whereas, like, you go an hour or two from here, you're seeing, like, farmland, you're seeing just empty, small towns.
And for those people, that's normal.
Right.
Right? So normal is, again, just a perception, right? So the reason that you suffer is because you treat all these things as though they're paramount or the utmost importance, and not only the utmost importance, more important than somebody else's. So you have to start by seeing them for what they are, that they don't have any inherent value, and you start with yours. You don't start with somebody else's. You go here. You look at your own preferences, biases, prejudices, opinions, identity, and you go. And you see it for what it is. It's just this thing to play with. It's an artful expression of who you are, but it's not meaningful, and it's not any more valuable than somebody else's. So first it starts by intellectualizing that, like that you have to sort of come to that conclusion that the stuff that you're suffering from isn't important. Okay?
If you treat it as if it's primary, like your suffering and your perspective on the world makes the world worse.
It contributes to further division.
Oh, 100%. Like, you think about it. You're gonna fix the world before you fix yourself.
Yeah, start with you, right?
And plus, everybody's gonna have their own perspective of what's going on. They're not gonna be objective. Being objective for even a short period of time, that's a pretty good success for just any average person who's stuck in the consumer cycle.
Okay, so now we're moving on to here. What can be done about it, right? How do you address this? So we started by first intellectually you have to recognize that these things that you treat with the utmost value aren't valuable. And then by treating them as though they're valuable, they contribute further and further to greater degrees of psychological distress. And by treating them without value, you're liberated from them. And now you can freely express them, no hang-ups.
Right. If anybody has the argument, like, what do you mean free from TV shows? TV shows aren't weighing me down. It's like, no, they're designed to have stressors and reliefs in the show. So you're not just constantly going, oh, this is a boring episode. You're going like, oh, wow, my favorite character, he did something awesome. And like 3 episodes later, you're like, oh, wow, I can't believe it. They wrote off said character.
Right. Okay, so now, having said that, so we've clearly established what's contributing chiefly to our suffering. And it's favoring your subjectivity. And that subjectivity is not only validated, it's reinforced by all the stressors within society, all of it, everything you can imagine and think of, right? And I don't want to go through the list again, but all of them, everything that we encounter in society contributes to that. So then is there a counterbalance? And yes, you start first with reason, and you reason that, hey, these things are not important. They're not valuable. So if you're able to come to that conclusion, right? Now you have the capacity now to now seek out a real counterbalance, and that counterbalance then is objectivity, right? So objectivity. So we're gonna, just to make this all the more interesting. Um, Subjectivity, sorry, let me try that again. Sorry, objectivity. Um, it's the edification of the individual. We'll start with that. So, what does edification mean? And it's derived from Greek, ancient Greek, and it's basically auto, which is self, and telos, end goal, right? And it describes people who are internally driven and may exhibit a sense of purpose and curiosity. So this is the first step towards objectivity, and the counter, and what you're going to require is a counterbalance to all the social conditioning you've experienced that's contributed to you favoring your subjectivity. So it requires edification, the elevation of oneself, right? Edification is the improvement, instruction, enlightenment, especially when morally or spiritually uplifting, the act of edifying or state of being edified. That's what you want to do. And the individual, sorry, I read the wrong definition for edification. I read the one for autotelic. Okay, so all these terms relate to objectivity. So, and autotelic describes people who are internally driven and may exhibit a sense of purpose and curiosity, right? So, and these people like that are prone then to what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi referred to as the flow state, right? So it's this optimal mental state where you're completely dialed in, you're completely present, right? And there's like these 6 aspects, and they've all got to be present for you to enter flow, right? So these 6 different things that are required are intense focus and concentration on the present moment, merging of action and awareness. This 2. 3, a loss of reflective self-consciousness. You're no longer self-conscious because you're not concerned with the self anymore, right? Subjectivity, you have a dog in the fight, and you're stressed out over whether or not the dog will be successful in the fight. Flow state, there's no dog in the fight. You're not self-conscious anymore. You're not thinking about you. You're dialed into the moment, right? A sense of personal control or agency, that you have the ability to exert that kind of, that you're in the driver's seat in that moment, right? And you'll also, as a result of it, experience a distortion of time. You'll experience time differently, right? And whatever it is that you're engaged with, that is somehow it's rewarding, right? And so this is the autotelic experience. And so what it produces in individuals is higher productivity. You have higher, you're able to act intelligently without any encumbrance from being encumbered by like emotions. You're free from that stuff because you're in the present moment. So these things that all have to be occurring, right, will lead to a higher productivity, a higher engagement with whatever you're doing, an increased level of satisfaction from what you're doing, and chiefly emotional regulation shuts down an emotional response. So now you're so dialed into the present, you're experiencing the love of doing something, which is not the same as joy, right? Like joy and happiness. I know they use them interchangeably, but it's because of the love of what you're doing, or you could even say the love of self, that you love yourself that much you're willing to apply all this extra effort. And what you're doing is you're engaging the task positive network of the nervous system. So when you do that, what also occurs? You end up experiencing better emotional regulation, higher pain thresholds, greater degrees of intelligence and creativity. So you're optimizing who you are as a human being. Now, the idea of being edification or of edifying, lifting ourselves up, and being autotelic, being a person unmotivated by biases or fear or pleasure or pain, which is again kind of relates to being stoic. All these things occur, but the question is, how do you achieve that state? That's the real question. This is what we want, but how do you get to that objective state? Because remember, greater degrees of intelligence means that now you're just the observer. You're seeing what's worth observing, and you don't make any conclusions based on any one single observation, right? Critical, objective thinker. So the critical component is that, again, to clarify before I get to the how, being judgmental is entirely an act of subjectivity, and it's you projecting your biases on any given moment because you're seeking a favorable outcome. That's why you're judgmental. But the act of judgment can be entirely objective because you have to be discerning. Being exhibiting judgment means that you're trying to distinguish what's real from what's not real. So that requires greater degrees of understanding. So the idea is the failure is not in judging something, it's in being judgmental. Do you understand that there's a distinction between the two, right?
Yeah, there's a way when you have a judgment and it's through like, can't believe it, I forgot the words.
That's okay.
Through a subjective lens, when you're being judgmental, it's because of your biases, anything that roots from your ego.
Right, so you're projecting, right? Another thing about subjectivity is when you're being judgmental in that capacity, you're signaling. You want others to approve of what you're doing, and not only do you want them to approve of your the judgments that you're making by being judgmental, that you want them to adopt those very judgmental judgments that you're making. Where objectivity doesn't care. It's not interested in whether there's no signaling. You don't care if people are interested in what you're saying or not what you're saying. What they should do is then it'll be left to the weight of the argument. Is it a reasoned, rational, logical argument, right? Being judgmental is also another way of saying rationalization, that you're offering a justification for your position, right? Again, it's a failure. It's a divisive move. It's a move to distract from whatever the objective truth might be. Okay, sorry.
No, that's fine. I was just thinking this is where you find all those like fallacies. The 10
logical human fallacies of thinking.
Yeah, there's a lot more than 10, but
there's 135 of them.
Seriously?
I think. Yeah, that's what's been identified. But the 10 most common are the ones that we exhibit very regularly and hence commonly in our interactions, and I do have the list here, so if you'd like me to quickly
this would be a good time to do it.
Okay, so the 10 logical fallacies of thinking. One is ad hominem, and it occurs when someone attacks directly the person making the argument rather than criticizing the argument itself, right? And it's Latin for against the man. Two, straw man is when someone attacks a person or a distorted version of the original argument that the person made, and so then your best defense is that's not what I said. You're interpreting it and then attacking the interpretation.
Oh, sorry, can I interject?
Sure.
If you really want to understand what the other person's saying, you try to make their argument for them and steel man it for them. That way, at least they're arguing from a position where you're like, that's reasonable, we can have a discussion about it.
Well, that's ultimately the whole everything should ultimately be about understanding. But these 10 logical common fallacies of human thinking, they're essentially like what we use to shut down any attempts to achieve a greater degree of understanding, right? Because somebody's arguing to be right. They want to be right. They don't want a greater understanding. So if they want to be right, it completely is a result of subjectivity, right? So then there's the appeal to authority. Well, if they're the experts, they know better than everyone else, so they must be right. Again, wrong thinking. The slippery slope, where the first you make a sensible premise and then you take it to an undesirable extreme or conclusion. So you go first, well, yeah, that makes sense, but if unchecked, it'll lead to this, right? That you'll hear that very often by people. And then now we'll move on to 5. I'm sorry that I'm racing through these, but I want to get back to the how of objectivity. So number 5 is bandwagon, and the bandwagon fallacy occurs when something is said to be true or good simply because it is popularly accepted. Everybody's doing it, so therefore it must be true. The appeal to ignorance. An argument must be true if it cannot be proven false, or false if it cannot be proven true, right? So again, these are tools used to justify your subjective view, and it's the way you'll argue to defend your subjective view. You're not bringing evidence and drawing conclusions from the evidence. Like, the evidence should actually indicate a conclusion.
Right.
You don't have to read into it, which is the way you're perceiving something. You're about to say.
I was gonna say, it's so silly. Like, if you have a favorite sports team and your friend said, "Oh, well, my team won this year. We're the best every year." If you we're the best team every year, we just won this year, and then they'll go ad hominem and they'll be like, "You like this other team? You're ridiculous. Like, you're ruining my day. How dare you?"
Yeah, of course, right? Justifying their bias, right? So, and another way that and number 7 is the false dilemma. This occurs when you reduce everything to 2 choices and presented as one is the only possible option, right? Where it's either this or it's that. Like, you can't have both, right? Which is a complete horseshit, because we understand that reality is paradoxical. It's usually a blend of the 2 polarizing extremes, whatever they are, right? And then hasty generalizations, where again, this is rationalization. It's a logical fallacy happens when a general conclusion is drawn based on a small sample size of limited evidence, and then what they do is it's judgmental. They'll project it on, they'll project that small case study on the entirety of a population, and then say that it's true, across the board, when the reality is what's required is further investigation, because again, it's a hasty generalization. But they'll use it, so limited evidence to defend their position. So that's a confirmation bias, or basically saying, because they cited it and because they cited this one example, that somehow must be true, right? And then number 9 is the red herring, which is deliberately attempting to move the issue under discussion to a new and irrelevant topic. So we're talking about homelessness, and because you and you're able to present an argument for homelessness that it's a direct result of the way that we organize society, and that so therefore under the way that we organize, therefore there must be people without, and the homeless represent that minority, that's a requirement, so that those at the top can have more, and then somebody would offer an argument to take it away from that conclusion and to something completely irrelevant. Like, what does that have to do with, like, me fishing in the river, right? Like, it's virtually a form of distraction that kind of changes the course of the conversation, so that you're no longer discussing whatever it was that was relevant, right? And now you find something irrelevant, a direction to take it into, so that you can shut down the discussion, right? And then appeal to tradition when, it must be good or true because it's been, it's traditional. We've been doing it forever, and again, couldn't be further from the truth, right? So all of this stuff demonstrates subjectivity, like in terms of how prevalent it is, and most of us are completely oblivious to it. And in fact, if you listen to us discuss this is probably the only time most people have ever even heard about it, because it's never something that's deemed worthy of conversation. And what could be more worthy and more timely than to be able to make the distinction that here within you, as a human being, we came into this world without any kind of owner's manual as how to be a human being. And we've been bombarded by political ideologies, religious ideologies that tell you just do this and everything will be okay. And I'm saying to you that you can draw from those sources, but you shouldn't treat them with value. What's valuable is your own ability to come to conclusions on your own, but it requires you to be objective, right? And we discussed, just before we got into the teleological fallacies, we discussed some of the benefits, right, of objectivity, but we haven't addressed the how. And there's a few more things I want to say about objectivity in terms of the benefits of objectivity. And probably the single greatest example of what the how can produce in a human being is we measure human brain waves in cycles per minute, right? In a hertz range, right? It's just a cycle per minute. And the highest expression that we're aware of based on science right now is gamma, which most of us never experience. We live our lives in beta, alpha, theta, and delta, right? That's what the typical average person, that's how their brain functions. That's the hertz range that they function in, right? Within those four given ranges. And I'm not going to get into the details of them, but the highest expression of it is called gamma, and it's 30 hertz to 100 hertz range. So that's well outside of the average hertz range, which goes essentially from like 1 hertz to like as much as maybe just before the 30 hertz range, right? And so if you're in that beta range and you're closer towards the 30, but you're not beyond 30, you're experiencing anxiety, right? That's where it exists in terms of the hertz range. It's highly energetic. But once you push past that 30 hertz threshold and you're into gamma now, the result of being able to enter gamma is increased cognitive enhancement, heightened perception, increased neuroplasticity, learning, attention to detail, problem solving, assisted memory recall are correlated with large-scale brain network activity and cognitive phenomena such as working memory, attention, perception, grouping, and can be increased in amplitude via meditation or neurostimulation. Okay, those are the how. And then you see what it leads to. Gamma is referred to by the researchers who study it as superconsciousness. They don't know how to exactly define it. And I think the flow state is just opening the door to gamma, right? Because the result of this higher brain function is that you also experience neurogenesis. your brain is two hemispheres, so it's almost like two separate brains. Well, as a result of either neurostimulation or meditation, those networks become more wholly integrated, right? You changed the density of gray matter in the brain and white matter, because the nervous system, including the brain, is made up of gray and white matter. So then you create greater degrees of gray matter. All that leads to is heightened perception, heightened capacities of intelligence, heightened expressions and degrees of creativity. And we never talk about it.
I was thinking a great example of this, if you think about Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's, I forget who he studied, but it was athletes mostly, right?
Why it was across the board. Like, so it was for high performance, but that was coming to the conclusions based on like his studies of just normal human engagement. So what he did was, anybody who was engaged, athletes typically are the most engaged. So they, remember, right, we refer to that as the zone, right, which is the same way saying the flow state. They happen to be completely dialed into what they're doing. So they meet all the prerequisites, those 6 prerequisites to achieve the flow state. But I would make the argument that through meditation, which is the equivalent, well, it's just training for the nervous system, that you foster all of that. So all the things that we discussed in terms of like the edification of self, being autotelic, flow state, the zone, all those things can be produced by meditation.
That's what I was trying to lead to. If you think about it, neurogenesis, assuming that you're doing it in a disciplined way where it's directed, it seems like you would be conditioning your brain to have much thicker neural pathways to the behavior and
right,
thought patterns.
Right. So it strengthens those pathways too. Right. So signal transmission increases. They don't lose the speed of transmission. So that means the nervous system working more efficiently.
But however, if you're getting neurogenesis from other means that aren't through discipline, it seems like there's like a possibility for just uncontrolled neurogenesis that might give you like alternative issues.
So the neurostimulation might be a way to produce that effect, and I understand what you're trying to say, that it run rampant. It might have negative effects, but I don't think it does.
I'm just saying, if you do it in an undisciplined way.
Well, then I think so we're gonna talk about meditation now. So if you use meditation irregularly, you're going to experience it in a very limited way, right? So the idea is to experience it consistently, right? That's the countermeasure against all the stimuli from social conditioning, from society, from everything that trains your nervous system to favor its subjectivity. So meditation, remember, one of the first things that's required is an intense focus on the current present moment. So meditation can be looked at as exercise for the nervous system. Look, people who go to the gym, they go with a very specific goal in mind because they want to produce a very specific outcome. And given enough time and the right course of training, you can produce a super advanced musculature. And an advanced musculature, what does it do? Beyond all the appearance stuff that like makes you look good, a strong muscular system in conjunction with your skeleton creates armor for the body and makes you more damage and impact resistant. So it has this really practical side to it, even though most people are driven by like aesthetics, like the way they look. They want to look pretty or beautiful or whatever. But functionally, it produces better performance out of the musculature, and it creates this, now in conjunction with the skeleton, an advanced organic form of armor that's impact resistance. So meditation, what does it do? It's a form of training that does what? It produces a very specific outcome in the nervous system. And what is the focal point of the training? To be present throughout the course of the meditation. Remember, it doesn't matter which form of meditation you do, as long as whatever the form is, that your conscious mind is being brought focused in the present current moment. That makes you prone to being objective, because now you can't be self-conscious in that state. And when you start meditating, what's the first thing you experience? The default mode network, the random thought generator, starts spitting out random thoughts to do what? Distract you. Because it favors, because remember, all that social conditioning has trained your nervous system now to favor being distracted. And now here you're offering a counterbalance, and what is it trying to do? Get in the way.
Yeah, I'm with you. All these information bits, they seem like they come together to present itself as like something that's obvious once you have the realization. However, I'm just saying, like, if you're the type of person that frequently participates in like something that alters your consciousness, it's possible you're just
So are you talking about like taking entheogens and stuff like that, like mind-altering substances?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, of course you're gonna change your your circuits, like, no matter what you do. But if you're constantly doing drinking, or every once in a while, a little too frequently, you're taking, like you say, entheogens, there's gonna be haywires going on.
Right, I agree. So if you're using any of that stuff, that's a shortcut, but the problem with the shortcut is that you don't get any of the long-term benefits, which is a changed relationship with subjectivity. You change as a result of the training to favor objectivity and to favor being present in the current moment. You change your relationship with subjectivity. It doesn't go away. You're not eradicating it or suppressing it. Now you change the nature of your relationship. And remember what I said, the first starts with you recognizing that those things are no longer valuable. So the random thought generator and the random thoughts that it presents you barely acknowledge them.
Yeah.
You don't treat them with what? Value.
Like you were saying earlier, it's not necessarily joy, it's just like I forget the word you used, but it's like peaceful pleasure and like
love. You experience love of self, love of the current moment, and it's liberating. Love's the only emotion that I would not actually lump in with all the other emotions, that negates all the other emotions, and you can only experience it when you're liberated from any hang-ups, psychological and physiological, that once those are addressed, then you can experience it. And I've made this argument many times before. And I thought what I wanted was unconditional love when I got into relationships. That what I was seeking is not what everyone's seeking. And then reality is that that unconditional love for a thing or for someone is you without restriction loving them. And so I don't think two adults should be attempting to have an unconditional love of one another. As adults, the way we love each other should be entirely conditional. But as a result of having children, I learned unconditional love. And the unconditional love is the love I have for them. My children should not love me unconditionally. Their love for me should be entirely conditional. Right? So now we're getting, because remember, emotions are the negative emotions are chief function of subjectivity, and it fuels subjectivity. Well, to think that that you can be objective without any kind of emotional context might be wrong. And I would say that it becomes the ultimate expression of love, that and by that I mean that you're satisfied with who you are, that you're good with you, right? How could you ever possibly love anything else or someone else if you don't love yourself first, or you're incapable of experiencing that? And then the right training method meditation. And remember, there's numerous forms of it. Just find one that works within your sensibilities. All the good ones will do the same thing. In the course of training, it will require you to focus on what you're doing at that present moment. And typically, that's why it's so very often tied to breathing, right? Because it's something that you can actually put your attention on. Your awareness can be in your breathing. And then what you're paying attention to is the quality of the breathing without judgment. Not being judgmental. No judgments within the course of it. All you're trying to do is every day train the nervous system to be here now. That will lead to liberation from all the negative aspects of who you are. And guess what? Those things don't go away. You'll still have them. But they won't influence you anymore. They won't inform your judgments. They won't exercise the kind of influence that leads to depression and anxiety and stress. Those things can be eliminated. And then again, in the broader context, how do you refer to this? It's self-mastery, sentient. There's three conflicts, which is interpreted usually to mean the struggle to unify mind, body, and spirit. Right? So that's what you're doing. Right? You're becoming a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker. Right? So there's no other way to shorten that phrase, which is an expression of what you're doing. So the phrase isn't important. It's what the phrase describes that's important.
Yeah, it's a very... I still haven't broken it down, really gave it thought, but it is a methodology that seems 100% accurate. Like you might disagree with this, but I personally feel like our ability to orient and focus is, well...
It's primary. It's the thing that you should be putting all your efforts in. Once you command control of that you're master of that, you can master anything.
Dude, I was going to say it's a superpower. Like, that's the superpower.
So there you go. So then we could all be superhumans. And maybe that's how all those traditions arose. Maybe some people within the lexicon of the last 6,000 years of human history who are described as being, demonstrating fantastic capacities. Maybe that's how they access them. Maybe they're a result of being in the gamma hertz range, right? Of a brain frequency.
Yeah, superhuman might not be like flying around lifting cars, but
it might, but it could. I wouldn't, far be it from me to sort of presume to know what that would be like. Right. But to your point, that it would lead to a place where you'd be, where it would lead to edification, the elevation of the individual to their highest expression.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to say that they're more human or superhuman.
They're just a refined human.
Exactly. It's
if you had an owner's manual, it would be the optimum way, like that. The owner's manual would tell you how to run being human, how to function as a human.
Which would be really hard because we're all unique.
Right, but I think there's universal methods that you can apply that it draws out all the full potential in the individual without sacrificing the uniqueness of the individual, right?
I was just thinking exactly what you said 100 million and one times. Unification, mind, body, spirit.
Right, all of it, right? That you can be all of that, and you don't have to be trapped anymore by the society at large, because all you have to do is stop treating it like it's important. But that's the failure. Our failure is that it's all important, it's all meaningful, right? Well, then you're trapped, and you're trapped by those very definitions. And what does that service? I make the argument all the time, right? You can reduce life to two things: either we are divided, separate, or that we're all that everything is unity and oneness. So subjectivity furthers the divide. You deciding that everything that you think, that you identify with, and every bias and opinion, and all that crap, preferences, your prejudices, all that you treat with the utmost importance, fucking valueless. And the moment that you're able to treat it valueless, then you're liberated from it. If you're trapped by it, it fosters only one thing: further and greater degrees of division. It separates us more. And in this time, this age of uncertainty, remember the cynics, the cynics of ancient Athens. In this age of uncertainty, what certainty is there left? There's only one certainty, and that's you mastering yourself. It's an absolute certainty. Given enough time, and you're motivated and disciplined to do the work, and you show up, it's the solution to uncertainty. Right? And guess what? It won't come with guarantees, or it won't have all the answers. It'll just give you the capacity to better explore the questions.
I think I mentioned this last time when we were talking about the cynics. It's like there's this old expression that the path or the traveling you've done is the journey. It's not the destination. I think regardless of where we're going, to have an ultimate goal is, God, it's hard to put it out there, but it's something like this idea that there's no final end goal.
Right.
But on the way there, you have this realization and you get this edification and this de-burden. You're de-burdening yourself.
Okay, so we discussed this in the watch the podcast that we did called The Way, and in the course of The Way, everything that he just cited is exactly what the way is. It's the path that you're walking, and what's most valuable is being on the path. The destination's irrelevant. So when you decide that you're going to seek self-mastery, that you want to achieve, you want to become a renegade individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker, you want to unify mind, body, and spirit, we're talking about self-mastery. That's the way. And the way can be, Miyamoto Musashi was quoted as saying, there's many paths to the top of the mountain. So you need to find simply your way. But the actual way that you walk, there'll be common threads between your way and everyone else's. Right? And what are the common threads? The realization that your subjective self and your subjective views should not be treated with seriousness or any weight or value. That'll be common, universal. That you train now to draw out the highest potential in you, which means that you favor being objective, and you can only train to that end by training to be present. And you look at all the greatest self-masters out there, they did exactly what I just said. They all achieved that, and it's a lifetime pursuit. It's not, I'm running this race and it'll be done in a half hour and I'm done and get all the rewards, yay me. No, forever, in perpetuity, until you pass. That's the way. This is the way. Right? Not the fucking fiction that Disney's selling you or The Mandalorian. The real way. This is the real way. And you're only going to get there through your own efforts. And you as the individual take on the journey. You're the pilgrim. Right? You're the one walking the path. Everybody does it. Everybody does it, and then if the argument that I make that everything's either separated or one, then you now have fostered a greater degree of oneness, not division. Right? And guess what? It's your responsibility. But remember, you've been socially conditioned. Not my problem. There's somebody else who's going to take care of it. You're there. Your problem. You're the one who's supposed to do something about it. Not wait for someone else. Which is what you've been trained to do. And guess what? You all exhibit it so well. How well's that served you up until now? It doesn't matter what age you are. Think about it. It's a rhetorical question. It doesn't matter if you're a Gen Z, a millennial, a Gen X, or a boomer. Everyone suffers from this, and yet all they do is stand around pointing fingers at each other. Fuck you all.
You're getting so passionate. I was about to say, dude, you're yelling at a camera. But
Well,
no, this is how it needs to be said. It's like, hey, get your balls. Get ready. We're going out.
Yeah, you have to do this, and I only allow for that intensity so that there's no question, right? So it emphasizes, it makes it explicit that it only works because you, the individual, do it. So you want unity, you want a better society, you want to save the planet. You need to fuck off and grow up, or grow up and fuck off. And you have to do the work. And if you feel burdened by your profession, I don't have enough time, find the time. Make the time. What could be more valuable and more meaningful to you for a lifetime endeavor? Unless, of course, the only measurement is your paycheck and what you do for money. So for those of you who think that that's what it is, you keep going. Good on you. Hope you enjoy your suffering.
Like, how much joy can you find at the bottom of the exact same bottle you've had for like 20, 30, 40 years? Like,
it's not a life.
Yeah, there's a limit to how much we have. Personally, I see it as like, there's two moments. It's now or it's not now. A lot of the time I'm stuck in the not now. And that's the subjectivity that I feel like we all go through.
Okay, so application becomes everything, right? So everything that we've discussed in a real world sense, you can apply it in the way that you live. And then what you can expect is greater degrees, the best version of you. What could be more exciting and thrilling than reveling in, like, here you tapped into who you are, the limitlessness that makes you up as an individual, and in doing that, now you contributed in the most meaningful way to the entirety and the totality of humanity. To me, it's a no-brainer. That's why I have a conscientious objection to all of society, to every aspect of society. I'm not opposed to institutions. I'm not opposed to organizing. The question is, to what ends and what purposes are you organizing? And whom does it service first, most? You could just as easily have a society where the focus of this society, and it's organized in such a way, and the resources are managed in such a way, where what the point of the society is to elevate the individual, to give them all the resources and everything required to tap into their unlimited potential. And then we can do anything. It wouldn't become a question of what we could do. It would become a question of what couldn't we do.
Or how much time is allowed for this? How much time today can I get everything done? And you're elated for it. It's like this. It's complicated, but it's not complicated. There's all these structures, all these institutions, but fundamentally, if you think, oh, I've been screwed out of something, or this sucks, or whatever, there's something at your door, and it's trying to find you. It's trying to get in, and you're letting it in. That's what subjectivity is.
It's running the show, and the question is, who do you want to be in charge? Your selfish self-interest?
Yeah, not that growling dog at the front door. Definitely not. Right?
What you want, and then you want to experience the fullness of what it means to be human, what it means to be alive. And you're only ever going to achieve that through self-mastery. And the methodology is meditation. And the focal point is to be present. It's training the nervous system. Once you've done that, then you can expect greater and greater degrees of honest expression of who you are. You'll become the real you, not the one that's been socially conditioned you. Right, which is your identity. It's a fiction. It's a thought construct. It's not who you really are. That's the argument I make. And you think about how much division all those things within the context of subjectivity, right? Perception, like all the biases, perception, imagination, preferences, prejudices, all that stuff, opinions, identity, all those things have proven to do is divide us further and further and further. And when you're that divided, what are you? Well, you're easy to control. You are the conquered. That's why you're easy to control. You can't control a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker. There's no such thing.
Yeah, there's no bait and switch. There's no
Right.
buzzwords or
Right.
buttons to push.
Yeah, no triggers, right? And so if this was the focal point of the majority of people, how radically different do you think our society and our world would look?
I mean, at least the individual gets to look in the mirror and go, hey, I don't suck. I'm a pretty cool guy.
Yeah, but as a result of doing that,
Large scale, it's impossible to predict. Honestly, there's so many people
You
with so
think-
much uniqueness out there.
you think it might be a radically beautiful and interesting place to be. It certainly wouldn't look like the place that we're in now.
This place isn't that bad. What are you talking
Oh,
about?
yeah, it's a beautiful place. I love it.
But I like this idea that I've been told like forever as a kid. It's like your room is an externalization of your own mind. Like in method, it feels weird, but it seems realistic. Like if you look at your place and you're like, oh, I have certain things that grab my attention. I have certain things that I dedicate my time towards. This thing has more space because it's more valuable. Why are you giving half your room up for a comfy chair and a TV? Is that the most important thing?
Well, given in the context of the society we live in subjectivity, the answer to your query is yes. Why wouldn't that be more the most like you devote the most amount of space to that end? It furthers your subjectivity. It's what society wants. Whether that's intentional or unintentional, not even relevant. Doesn't fucking matter. The fact is that's what you do. When you could just as easily have training mats on the floor and whenever you got free time you're doing some form of meditation or you're BJJ or practicing martial arts. How is that any less valid than parking your ass in front of a TV and watching actors portray people who are doing meditation and martial arts? I go, right? So you don't have to be trapped by the fiction. You can just make it a reality, right? So it again, entirely up to you, the individual. I don't have beliefs. But if I did, one of my deepest would be that the greatest untapped natural resource that we have is humanity itself, is us, every single individual, that you all have something to contribute and you can all make a difference. And don't allow the mechanisms of society which disempower you to rob you of your power. You can take all of that back.
It's funny to assume that we're being disempowered by them. We're the ones giving it up freely.
That's right.
They're asking us for our money. Please buy this chocolate bar. Please buy this new TV set.
Yeah.
It's like what? There's $400 for a cheap TV.
Well, and again, particularly in this time, in the cost of living skyrocketing, and here's the thing: for people who have affluence or have access to means, they can still manage with that. But those who are already at the bottom end of the spectrum, who don't have material means, that means they're going without. And I'm like, so we're just going to exploit portions of the population for the advantages of a small minority at the top. That's what subjectivity has led to. That's why for 6,000 years of human history, we've had small groups dominating society at large. right? And benefiting from that domination, while the rest of us are left to scavenge a meager existence from reality, right? So, like I said, I can't stress enough how much of a conscientious objection I have to all this shit, right? Like you couldn't, like this, everyone should cultivate a conscientious objection. Just say no, stop participating, start living. You know?
Break the cycle, essentially.
Yeah.
It's funny, there's intergenerational issues and then there's like just human issues. Like ego is a human issue, but when it comes to intergenerational issues, it's like, oh, we don't like that group, or we think down towards people that have this religious belief.
Right, tribalism at its worst, right? Because it's so they seek out their tribe based on their subjectivity, right? I go, you're still divided, but you have the comfort of people who will turn on you the moment it's convenient for them.
Yeah, it's weird to have a group that's based off of othering. Because you think about it, like fundamentally, all humans are more alike than they are different.
Right, but it doesn't. That's the last thing that they're thinking about.
Yeah.
They're thinking about their safety and security, right? And they only get that from, I like you, you're like me, I like you, because you're like me. A kind of ridiculous kind of this. It's the reasoning of idiots, right? Because they're afraid. Remember, what drives all this? Fear. And what does meditation do? Right? And training to be in the present moment, training to be in the here and now. It liberates you from those emotions. It teaches you emotional maturity and emotional regulation, where they are no longer making decisions. That they're not influencing the choices you make. You're not driven by fear. You're driven by a strong sense of exploration, a sense of, like here, what's around the next corner in terms of exploring yourself.
I hate to say it, but we've been conditioned to be like consumers, but it came at the cost of like any real security and any real meaning. Because if you think about it, once you have meaning, you don't need alcohol. Once you have meaning, you don't need thoughtless relationships with people you meet at the bar. Like all these things can be put aside once you accept that there's like this reality of like, oh, I'm an individual. I am going to pass away. It's going to be horrendous and it's going to be the worst thing I ever experienced, unless there's somebody I care about in the future. And that then it becomes like, okay, is that conditional, unconditional love? And then you can think about it more. But fundamentally, I feel like most people are in fear. Like, one day this is all gone. Not for everybody. It might just be for you.
Well, like I say, through self-mastery, then you're no longer influenced by fear. You're not afraid. And then a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker will have the capacity to connect with anybody. So you'll be able to foster even greater degrees of connection or sense of connection, oneness, right? So that's where this leads, and the choice is really up to the individual. And if you're totally cool with your subjectivity, fuck you, knock yourself out. I'm not. I can't, because I know how much I suffered at the hands of that, and it was horrible. I can't, to this day, I can't fathom how shitty I felt, how horrible I felt. And not for like a day or 2 months, years. And it was all my own fault. You can free yourself. Right? I think that might be a really good spot to close this. Free yourself. Anything you'd like to say in closing?
Silas said to me once, a friend of mine, he said, people don't upset me because I don't allow them to. And that was something I've never thought of. It was so foreign. I couldn't conceptualize it at first, and then I realized, yeah, it's what you let in.
Right. You don't let them into your head. You don't let them get under your skin. Right. He was a wise man. So, in closing, I would like to say, question everything, including yourself, especially yourself. Seek balance, seek knowledge, seek understanding. Become a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker. Thank you and good night.